Well, before we start, I just want to make sure I congratulate David Griffin and Trajan Langdon, Willie Green, and the Pels for making the playoffs, and just wish them all the luck in the world as they get game 2 of this first round underway. So, look, you guys know the drill. Start asking.
Does your philosophy on whether to trade up or trade down change at all with sort of the state of the current roster, but also the fact that you only have 2 picks in the top 150?
It might. Yeah, it might. Considering that, look, every year I say that we're willing to do either way, and then I'm like 15-0 going up, right? So it's kind of hard for me to keep saying that I'm willing to trade back, and then I haven't done it for quite some time. So,
What do you think? Like, obviously, we know why you value trading up, but
Yeah.
what is it that makes the concept of, oh, we'd like more lottery tickets, more swings
Yeah.
at the plate? Why do you not feel like more is automatically better?
yeah, look, I think there are cases where there are cases where dropping back makes some sense to get more picks. I just think in our case, most of the time, it's just been a move too far back. And, if you move back 2 or 3 or 4 spots, probably the level of players similar. If you're moving back, 8 to 10, I think oftentimes you're dropping down a class. If you believe in your board, you believe in the evaluations that your staff have done, then it's just hard for me to grasp getting a lesser player talent-wise. And so I really believe in the evaluation process that we do, and that's what makes it more difficult.
Mickey, are you actively looking at ways to get into rounds 3 and that big hole? Do you think about that? Like, how much are you thinking about the from, what is it, 45 to 150, whatever it is? I mean, that's a big gap.
Yeah, it's a big gap. I wouldn't say that we're spending a lot of time thinking about that right now. The way the draft is structured currently is that, we do the first round on Thursday, and then we have, the second and third on Friday, and so then, we have a whole evening, a whole day, really, to strategize about moving into the 3rd and 4th round. And look, part of that depends upon who are the players available. Do we really want to move up? And look, when you have 4/5, that gives us an opportunity to bump, take a couple of those and bump it up. But we won't be thinking about that until we know who the players are that are going to be available. Is there someone that we've got really graded high that has dropped down, and man, let's put a target on them and find a way to go get that player, because that's what we've done historically, even in some of the later rounds. But that's not a process that you spend a lot of time right now. It's just there's so many variables. We're focused on, hey, what's going to happen in the 1st and 2nd round right now with those first 2 picks.
I know, just considering some of the uncertainty around Ryan Ramczyk, how important is it for you guys to know that they have a really good sense of where that's going to lead going into draft day, just considering it's a starting tackle?
I mean, look, it is what it is. I don't. There's a lot of things we don't have control over right now. So, I don't think we're spending a lot of time thinking about that specifically.
Do you have a good sense of where he is right now?
I think we do, yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
similar to what Dennis said last time he talked about it? Like, has anything changed since?
Yeah, no, I don't
last
think
month or
anything's
so?
changed. We got a lot of time left.
I know the last time we spoke with you, you had a great line about, like, people have gotten too comfortable and it may be time to make people uncomfortable. I know it's kind of a philosophical approach, but how much does that carry into the draft from maybe we have to think of things in an uncomfortable way versus kind of the foundation pillars and philosophies that you've gone with for years?
Yeah, well, I think the process is still the same. I think we are maybe trying to think about it a little differently. We've got, a couple people from that haven't been with us that are with us, through this process. And so I think we value their input, a little different view. Plus, the new coaching staff on the offensive side of the ball, they're all coming from, they're coming from different places and they have different perspectives. And, that's just good to have an infusion of different ideas.
How does that change the process with the new coaches? Just, how's that conversation and just?
Yeah, it doesn't change the process. It's just, look, we value their opinion. We've always valued coaches' opinions, when we're making these decisions relative to the draft and free agents, and yet they're coming from different places where they've done it differently, and so we're trying to blend how we do it and what we ask of them with what they're used to, and it's been really good though.
Do you think this is a good year, a good class for offensive tackles this year?
Well, I think it's a good year for offensive players. That's probably the way I'd put it. A little better, offensively than defensively. And yet, man, I just know that 3 or 4 years from now, we're going to look back and there's going to be some great defensive players come out of this draft, and we're going to say, why didn't we see that? Or it should have been obvious. So.
I was gonna say, is there any specific positions that you see strength or a lot of?
Yeah, I think everyone would say that the offensive line's a position of strength in this draft, and wide receivers, and but there's players at every position. It's just a matter of how we look at them versus some of these other clubs.
Do you have positions that you would still say are like must right now? And is offensive tackle a position that you would say is sort of a must at this point?
Yes, I'd rather not discuss what we think is, yes, in terms of, there are some musts on our board yet, some tags we haven't filled. Just like there's some needs and there's a few wants, but I'd rather not get into anything specific.
Yeah, how was Trevor Penning's offseason gone to this point?
Yeah.
And you'll still view him as tackle? Is
Yeah.
there a position, maybe another position you would?
Yeah,
put him on?
well, I think it's gone well, and look, there's a lot of off-season left here, and we have a new offensive staff, a new offensive line coaches, and I think they're anxious to get to work with him once we're able to get on the field.
When you're changing offensive systems, the way it's the first time you've done it in quite some time, how much weight does that add in terms of, the players you might look at in terms of, okay, we need players that can do this to run this type of offense, as opposed to other years where it's been?
Well, I think it's more nuanced than it is just these wholesale differences. It's just the nuance of what this system and what these coaches want the players to do, and that's it's part of the learning process for us. Is, hey, what exactly do our coaches value in terms of what they're asking the players to do, but it's a lot more nuanced. I mean, look, we got guys in our building that can do exactly what they want to do, and some better than others, and so that's part of the process that our coaches have to go through when they get these players on the field and they start talking about how they want to play and how they want them to play, and there'll be these little subtle differences.
How do you feel about the depth of this draft, just with so many day 3 picks? Do you feel like there'll be some good players?
Yeah, look, I think it's fine. I think it's normal, and yet until we get into it and we see what's available when you get down into the the later rounds, that how many names are on our board still when we're picking in the 5th round will dictate how deep we think it is.
How does the math kind of work when you're trying to weigh like the present versus the future and like the state of the team at that current year? Like how do you guys kind of weigh all those different factors together?
I don't know that I can answer that. I mean, we think about it. I think generally speaking, coaches are thinking about right now, and in the personnel end of it, we're thinking about next year and the year after as much as we're thinking about right now. But it all comes into play. It just does. It's just the nature of not just our sport, but professional sports in general is and you got to be focused on right now, with an eye toward the future.
Like, do you guys ever, or you specifically, do you ever have to battle that, like something that you need right now, but maybe there's like just such a great
Yeah,
opportunity that might be
absolutely.
like.
You absolutely have to battle that. And battle maybe not the right word. You just have to consider about you know, are you picking for right now? Or are you picking for 2 years from now? And that's part of, you know, what the big function of my job is, to make sure that that we're doing what's right for the franchise, not just for this year, but going forward. And it's why the value of a position becomes really important, you know. And so you may not need, I don't know, a pass rusher, but there's a guy available that's going to help you down the road. Not as much right now, but down the road, you got to consider that because of the value of the position. So I think those are the things that every team, you know, has to consider as they go through this process.
Is it accurate to say you guys have taken a little more long-term thinking into this offseason so far with how you approach free agency?
I don't feel that way. I think we've always taken the right view in terms of, you know, this year versus the future. I think we've always had that in mind. I didn't feel like we've done anything different.
It's been, you know, the one-year contracts. Was that something you went into this offseason saying, this is what we're going to do now, you know, as opposed to giving big deals?
I think that's more a function of the salary cap and where we're at with the salary cap than it is in terms of any, you know, long-term plan.
Do you ever, when talking about filling needs, and so you don't, I know ideally you fill all your needs before the draft so that you can think long-term in the draft, but do you ever, and I'm using this year as an example, but I guess you'd probably think more past years so you don't give away your plans, but like, we have a needed offensive tackle, we like that there's 4 or 5 guys to choose from at 14. Let's fill that need in the draft. Will you ever approach the draft like, let's wait and fill that need in the draft, or is that dangerous?
Well, part of that's the timing, you know, of free agency versus the draft. I don't think at the time of what free agency begins, you may have an idea of what the draft looks like, but you don't really know because we haven't gone fully into that process, right? We haven't gone through the whole process with the draft. And so, yeah, you have an idea, but I don't know that it's, you know, enough to fully make that, you know, part of the decision-making process.
How do you feel about last year's draft?
I think it remains to be seen. You know, I'm not going to evaluate a draft, you know, at the time of the draft or even 1 year. It takes a while, and so I'd rather not even answer that because I've said in the past you have to wait 3 years before you can evaluate a draft. So I'm not going to evaluate it now.
I know you all have, you know, some of us didn't know what like RAS was for a long time, and now I think everybody knows what it is. And I think S2, you all were kind of one of the first teams to use that technology. How important is it to continue to find areas? I mean, I know you talk about going back 40 years when you just kind of sat down with somebody and got a feel, and now there's all sorts of technology and tests and different analytics and metrics. How important is it to kind of maybe stay on the forefront of that?
Yeah.
Is there anything else that, you know, that's out there now?
I think all of it's important. I think, you know, more information is better, and this how you filter through all of that, how you make it part of your decision-making process. They're all just tools, though. It's, you know, I tell our guys all the time, let's start with what our eyes tell us, and then let's use the tools to confirm it or contradict it. And if there's a contradiction, then we need to get that resolved. So I think, you know, we're using all of it. We got a new draft room upstairs with some new technology that we're kind of excited about. We've got some tools that, you know, our guys are developing, our IT guys and our analytics guys are developing, and it's all good stuff. Yeah, you know, but again, it's just tools in the toolbox, and we keep adding tools.
Do you think it's like RFID and live on-field tracking impacted the metrics that you would otherwise get from combine workouts?
Yeah, we're getting it all, and we're looking at it. You know, I think sometimes it's hard to interpret what it means And so I think we're still kind of in that process. You know, you mentioned the on-field tracking, you know, we get all those numbers, and yet I think there's still some, okay, what does it really mean? You know, how do we compare it? I don't think we have enough history with that to, you know, make any, you know, firm assumptions relative to that information. So we're still kind of sorting through, you know, a number of those things. At least I am.
Without giving away too much, what's some of the new stuff you guys have in the draft from that, and how might some of those things help?
Yeah, it's just applications and you know, the speed of which we're able to access it, the speed of what, you know, we're able to get a quick cut up, you know, relative to, you know, any particular player and who they've played against, and it's you know, pretty cool stuff.
Does that stuff make it easier or potentially create more caution when
Yeah,
it comes
good question.
to that? Especially when it comes to the idea of,
Yeah.
you know, you got a prototype at a position or something like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might be willing to make an exception based upon some other, you know,
Yeah.
metric or something like that. Does having more information make that easier, or does it create more caution?
That's a good question. Depends on the evaluation. Depends on the you know, who we're looking at. It's, you know, I'm not one who likes exceptions, and so, you know, generally I think we have to be convinced that an exception is worth the risk. But you're right. You have more things to look at, and I don't know how to answer that. It's better in some cases, and sometimes it clouds the issue.
Do you have any particular, sorry, go on.
Do you anticipate being active in free agency after the draft? I know past years, you know, Tyron Matthew, Jarvis Landry a couple years back. You anticipate another?
Yeah, I think, you know, we're going to keep looking. Yeah, there's still good players out there that haven't found a home yet. So I'd say we're going to be in that mix. Yeah.
Is there a benefit that comes to that, to waiting after the draft, is beyond like?
Yeah, I think, look, you know, you go into the draft thinking you're going to get, you know, certain positions and even undrafted free agents, and then afterwards you end up, and we have a gap here, and who's available. And
With the uncertainty about Lamchek's health and Trevor's development, Andrus is a free agent.
Yeah.
Does your mindset right now have to be, we can't be sure that either starting tackle is on our roster right now?
Yeah, but I don't think that's any different than any other year, is that, man, until you have somebody in your building, somebody under contract, that you're confident about, you know, their ability to play, that, you know, that's always the case. And so I don't think that's any different than any other year.
You still have an interest in Pete, or?
You know, I'm not going to discuss any of those individual players, but, you know, he's a free agent right now, so.
How do you think maybe the teams picking in front of you might help you pick at 14? Like, you know, there are a lot of quarterbacks in this draft that might go early, wide receivers. Like, if there's a position you guys want, it seems like it might be favorable for.
Yeah, again, you know, we don't have any control over that, so we're just gonna, you know, have to really just sit there and see what happens in front of us, and look, you know, we're gonna have our top 14 players. Anytime someone from behind that goes into the first 14, that's a good thing for us. That's the way I look at it. But we don't have any control over that, so I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Do you have any particular way that you evaluate whether or not a draft is considered a success? Like, I feel like there's so many ways to do it. Like, if every pick you had got a second contract but none were stars, is that a success? Or if you had one generational player but no one else panned out, like, how do you look at a draft and say that was successful, I guess?
Yeah, well, I guess first of all, if it's your draft, you're looking for any way to make it successful, right? So let's be honest. You know, I'm always looking for ways to point to a particular draft and say, yeah, that was really successful. I think it can be either or, right? It can be either or, and you know, generally you want every pick to be successful. You just do. You know, I look back and look at 06, and we had, you know, a bunch of guys in that draft class that had 10-year-plus careers, which is really, really unusual in our league, and so that was successful. And a couple of those they weren't 10 years with us. But that was a successful draft, and in 2017, that was a big draft because we had the offensive and defensive, rookies of the year, and those guys have had good careers, and along with some other guys. So there's just a lot of variables that impact it, and I guess someday I'll look back at all those drafts and call them a success or a failure. I don't really do that right now. I'm just looking forward, not back.
I know it's probably like a case-by-case basis with the trades, but like how does this process work? Do you guys look for spots ahead of the draft where the guy slides to here, we'll try to make a call here? Do you have like people you've done business with in the past?
Yeah.
Or sometimes is it like, hey, we need to try something really quick right now? Like how does that work?
Well, look, I think for us, we will look at, okay, we're at 14, for example. I'm going to look at, okay, what's it take to get to 13? What's it take to get to 12, 11, 10, 9, 8? That's probably about where I'd cut it off. And I'll go back. How far back are we willing to go? Generally, I'm going to look 10 spots in front and 10 spots behind. And then I'm going to spend a lot of time in the next couple days saying, hey, what's the value of that? What's it going to take? What's the history in our league when somebody's traded from 14 to 10, 14 to 9, whatever. And what's the history of going from 14 back to, 20? So I'll have in my mind over the next few days, not just me, but our staff will be looking at that and saying, what's it take? And then there'll be a lot of calls over the next 2 or 3 days to, those GMs and those teams in front of us and those teams behind us. Hey, what are you thinking? Are you have an inclination to come forward? You have an inclination to go back? And so we'll have an idea. And look, every GM is doing this. We'll have an idea of what might be available. And then, day of the draft, and as you're on the clock, then it becomes a little more urgent. That's the process. It's imperfect.
What's your internal review on whether you think that's been good for this team, moving up as much as you have, the 25 straight or whatever? Has it?
Well, I must think it's pretty good if we keep doing it, right?
Is that true, though?
I feel like it's been good for us, yes.
When you go into the draft with, 7 day 3 picks, does that affect kind of how you evaluate the back end? Do you need to have a bigger pot of players that might be there with that much variance of who could be on board?
I don't think it changes. I don't think it changes. I mean, we have a formula for how many players need to be on the board for each one of our picks, and it's never failed. So, so that really hasn't changed much. I think what'll change is when we get to that day, when we get to day 3 and we've got all these picks, that hasn't been typically what we have, and who's to say that that's what we'll have when we get there?
Mickey, when you looked at, you were talking about the trades, I'm curious, so last year there were 6 first-round trades, 22 there were 9 first-round trades. So you talked to other GMs, obviously, certainly, is it something you can anticipate? Like if I were to ask you, do you feel like 2024 is going to be another kind of one of those years, or is it somebody makes a trade and it becomes kind of a domino effect, and all of a sudden more teams that weren't going to trade.
Yeah, look, I don't have a sense of that. Maybe I'm not smart enough, but I feel like the amount of conversations and the things that happened before the draft weren't any different the last 2 or 3 years than they were any other year, and so I don't feel like this year's any different. So I don't anticipate more or less in terms of that kind of movement.
Surprise trades. All of a sudden, the team,
Yeah.
you weren't anticipating trades up, and now all of a sudden that changes everybody's. And now there are more trades because of that.
Yeah, I don't feel that way, but I don't have any evidence either way.
Mickey, do you like the choices at 14, or what you think the
Yes.
choice is going to be?
I do.
You think you can get help there?
I think we're going to get a really good player, yes.
Mickey, when y'all rank 1 through 14, is that strictly based on their prospects as an NFL player?
Yes.
Or you haven't factored in position of need in any
Nope.
way? It's strictly.
Nope,
the
we grade
14
the, we grade the, grade the player, grade the talent.
You're looking at positional value, like you were referring to earlier. Do you break that down even further at the position, left tackle versus right tackle, slot corner
Mhm.
versus outside?
Yeah.
One takes precedence over the other, generally?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we have, like, we have more than, we don't just have offensive tackle. We have them, delineated between left and right. We have, corners and nickels, and we have wide receivers and slot receivers. So we have, a little more defined positionally. And there's a lot of guys that are versatile, can do, different things, so you gotta factor that in as well.
What's the furthest you've ever gone from your highest ranked player to fill a need? Like 2 magnets down, 10 magnets down, like, but how far have you strayed
It's
from
not
that?
close to 10.
Yeah.
Well, are you talking about in the first round, second round, fifth round?
I'll take both, but first round, I guess.
Yeah, we're not
First or
gonna,
second.
we're not gonna vary. It's not gonna be, it might be 2, but they might be, just because you have 2 magnets doesn't, in some years they're gonna be right next to each other. They really should be side by side. In some years there's gonna be a gap. We're not gonna, we haven't picked anybody where there was a gap, to fill a need.
At that point, would you like trade back if it was like, we have to get the need? Is that when you would maybe say, all right, we're going back a few spots?
Yeah, it's more about the players available, it's more about the quality of players available than it is about the need. Need's a variable. I'm not gonna deny that, but it's not the variable.
I know at your season-ending media conference, there were like social media rumors about you moving on, and you quickly kind of dismissed them as, I guess, like BS. Do you, I guess, feel like as excited as you ever have doing this? Do you get kind of the same feel every year knowing you're going to change young players' lives and just kind of where you are entering the draft in year
Yes,
30 or
100%.
whatever?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm as enthusiastic as I've ever been.
When you're opening the door to.
Do I not look like I'm as enthusiastic as I've ever been? I'm not enthusiastic about this part of my job.
When you open the door to possibly consider someone that would be an exception, what's the study look like from there? You kind of like, okay, these guys with this arm length have done that. Like, how do you guys kind of break that down?
Yeah, well, it's just so different depending on the position. Here's the description. If it's an exception, do they walk on water? So you define that however you want to. They got to walk on water.
Are there traps that GMs can fall into, like thinking you can fix the exception? Like, what are some things that you've been doing this for so long that you kind of, all right, we have to be careful to avoid this? Or
Well, I think we're all confident enough in our abilities, and by all I mean coaches, scouts, GMs, all of us are confident enough in our abilities that we think we can fix something. And but there's some things that I think are just really difficult to fix. And I think over the years, that's where, experience comes into play. Is it, man, because it's the exceptions, right? There's always exceptions. And I think sometimes you fall into this trap of, well, there's this one exception, so this works too. But I think it's really, I'm not explaining this correctly, but I think that's the trap that you can fall into.
In the third day of the draft, is the dialogue in the draft room become more prevalent on each draft? Because, I mean, I don't know, is that kind of the way it works?
Well, I think on the third day of the draft, you're looking at players that can contribute in some way. Can this guy make our roster? Or do we have so many guys at that position it's going to be really difficult for him to make the roster? That's the start. And then if he makes the roster, he's going to be active on game day. What's the contribution? And so those are more the discussions that don't happen in day one and day two, because when you're picking in those earlier rounds, you're making an assumption that that guy's going to be on our roster. He is going to be on our roster. Those conversations are more about, hey, is he going to be our starter this year or next year? And so you get to the last day, it's more about, hey, what are the traits that allow this guy to make our team, first of all? And if he's not going to make our team, is this guy going to be on our practice squad and be able to develop? Does he have, the developmental traits that we're looking for? And so the conversations are different than they would be earlier.
Mickey, do you feel like pretty confident that Marshawn Lattimore's going to be on this roster this year?
Yeah.
And if there was any trade discussion, I mean, does that kind of end with the draft or not necessarily?
Yeah, no, listen, it's not specific to Marshawn, so there's always conversations about all kinds of players, so it's not any different.
With the new kickoff rule, has that changed maybe how you might prioritize some of the positions differently?
Yeah, we're discussing that about, we've had a lot of discussions with our special teams coaches and even some people with experience in the league that had that type of kickoff about what's the makeup of those units, and but it's been discussions, and how that affects our roster, I think, remains to be seen.
I know that you all,
It's a topic, though, for sure.
everybody always talks, and I know that you all have Derek and you signed some veterans, but just, you talk about the offensive players in this draft, not anybody specifically, but it seems like it's so hard for teams to draft quarterbacks now. There's so many hit and miss. It's just kind of, what are your thoughts on the class this year as a whole, specifically maybe some of the ones that are projected to go early?
I think there's a lot of good ones, I think there is, and yeah, I just think there's a good volume.
Just to clarify on Lattimore, do you approach those types of questions with every player we have? I'm always going to say that they're going to be on our roster this early. Like, if the answer was something other than yes, would you say
Yeah, what
that?
do you think?
I'm just saying, because now it's going to be like a,
Right, what do you
it's going to
think?
be a headline.
Yeah,
that, he's going to be on the roster in 2024, so it's just.
Yeah, that's not what, that wasn't my answer. My answer, he was asking me a question, I'm trying to avoid it. Because let's be honest. You guys know me, I don't like talking about specific players. You ask questions, and look, you have the right to ask the question, but, listen, everybody's tradable. Just depends on, the offer that you get, right? And yet, it's not very common. I'm not one who likes to do a lot of trades. I don't like trading players that have been contributors for us. I like maximizing our roster with the guys we got. But we've made trades before, so there's too many what if things here, right? If there was something imminent, I still wouldn't tell you, but.
You kind of laugh sometimes that there's, like, it always gets out there, like, oh, you could trade this player and get a draft pick,
Yeah.
but I mean, not in specific player, but that would be trading an already established player for someone who could be just as good as that player, but maybe not. So when you see that, just with any star player, I guess, it kind of makes you laugh, because trading something established for the unknown, I guess.
Yes, but there's also this, I think there's an assumption that there's not as many opportunities as people think to either trade players that you have or acquire players. There's not nearly as many opportunities as you think. There's a lot of discussion, not a lot of discussion, there's discussion about things, but there's not that many opportunities that come along, I don't believe. So I think there's an assumption that you can just pick up the phone and trade anybody and trade for anybody, and that's just not the case. There's a lot of variables. The salary cap makes it difficult. The replacement. If you trade away a player, you got to replace them, and there's just a lot of variables that you've got time. We've got time and a lot of coaching and invested in these guys, and look, we want them to be successful here.
From what you saw of Hayner last summer, do you think he's ready to step up and compete for that backup spot?
Yeah, I mean, look, I say, I don't really answer questions about specific guys like that. it's early in the offseason. We like what we saw last year, but we've got an offseason here with a new offensive staff to, go through that and evaluate the player. But yes, we like Jake.
Is your trade value chart, does it get tweaked every year? Like,
Yeah.
your 2024 trade value chart kind of set right now, and do you I think you talked about it last year, you follow a certain, it's like 3 or 4 about.
Yeah, we have them all. It's a guideline. It's not really, it's not something that's fixed. At least not for us. It's a guideline. I spend as much time, looking at the history. I mean, I have the history basically since 1999 for every draft trade that's made. So I look at all those, and you pay a lot more attention to the ones that have happened recently since 19 or 20 probably. But we have the trade chart values. They're just guidelines, and some teams I think are a little more stringent in terms of their trades and making sure the points line up. But we have them all, and they get tweaked a little bit. I think they've remained pretty much the same the last couple of years, but before that I felt like they were constantly evolving.
How often do you find the price adjusting for trading up when it comes to like a quarterback, like a quarterback, but the price for that kind of doesn't screw up the metric of
Yeah.
more for a quarterback, like when you want to trade up for another position,
Yeah.
how does that kind of affect?
Yeah, I think. Well, if you're trading up into the top 10, I think that's where, and you might as well just throw the charts out the window, right? I think later in the draft, the charts come into play, and you can rely on them a little bit more in terms of the value. But when it comes to trading into the top 10 or top 15 even, and getting a quarterback, that's when the values can get pretty skewed. But look, we all recognize that. Hey, they were trading up to get a quarterback, so they were desperate to make that move, and so we factor that in.
Do you find trading into like the top 10, 15 for a non-quarterback is more, like, are teams putting a realistic price on that, or is it still heavily inflated because they look at the quarterback deals?
Well, I think recently any trade into the top 10 has been more expensive in terms of resources, regardless of position. That's why it's hard to do. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.